Great. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I'll be fairly brief in my opening remarks and let our discussion be guided by questions. Listen, I think many of us are exhausted today after a long and harrowing day yesterday. What happened at the Capitol yesterday was an abomination. It was no less than an insurrection mounted against our federal government, inspired and egged on by the President of the United States and his enablers in Congress. Donald Trump may have lit the match that caused those protesters to march onto the Capitol, break through barriers, break through windows and doors, and seek to do harm to members of Congress. But the bonfire that Donald Trump lit, it was prepared by members of Congress, by members of the House and the Senate, who decided to raise objections to the certification of the Electoral College and create an expectation amongst those protesters that by joining in to this effort, they could perhaps keep Donald Trump in office for another 4 years. I'm glad that they were not successful. I will say I was really proud of most of my colleagues yesterday. We spent a lot of time together behind closed doors in a secure room, and there was effective unanimity amongst senators that we needed to get back into that chamber as soon as possible to get the people's work done. And I was glad that the House came to the same conclusion. I'm also glad that a handful of my colleagues decided to switch their votes. We were engaged in pretty active conversations with many of the members who had planned to object to the certification of the Electoral College in that secure room. And I'm glad some of those conversations did contribute to some of my colleagues changing their disposition. At the same time, we should have never been in that position yesterday. Donald Trump should have never instigated these individuals to march on the United States Capitol, knowing full well what may transpire. And my colleagues should have never created the belief amongst that crowd that there was any hope of Donald Trump remaining president of the United States. I serve as a member of Congress, member of the Senate from Connecticut, but I'm also the ranking member of the legislative subcommittee on the Appropriations Committee. And in that role, I have had now two separate fairly long conversations with the chief of Capitol Police and then another long conversation with the Secretary of the Army. I've been in contact throughout the last 12 hours with Chairman Ryan in the House, Senator Schumer in Senator Schumer's office. I don't know exactly what a sort of full investigative process will look like. But clearly we need to make serious changes to the way that our Capitol is defended. And we need to start implementing those changes now. The primary responsibility for yesterday's insurrection, yesterday's breach of the Capitol, lies with the perpetrators, Donald Trump and his enablers in Congress. But we do have to ask questions as to how that breach occurred, what changes in Capitol security we need to make in order to assure it doesn't happen again, and why it took so long for the United States military to come to the aid of the legislative branch. Inside that building yesterday were the top three people in the line of succession to become president. And it took nearly 3 hours for any Department of Defense response to arrive at the Capitol. We have to ask ourselves some questions. Why are we spending $700 billion on the military every year if the military can't effectively defend the United States Capitol from attack? I know this is different than a foreign attack. I am learning today how many different protocols are in place, how many different signatures need to be made in order to get the Department of Defense to arrive on the Capitol ground. But we need to take a serious look at why the Capitol Police and the municipal police were left to battle protesters for over an hour before the breach of the building took place without any assistance from the Department of Defense, and then why it took several more hours for any help to come from the National Guard. We can't rely on having advanced intelligence. I think that the Capitol Police should have pre-positioned more assets. I think they should have requested more help, but we shouldn't have to wait 4 hours to get Department of Defense assistance when the United States Capitol is under attack. So we've got a lot of questions that we need to ask, and we don't have the luxury of time. The sense of impunity that many of these attackers have by virtue of the fact that only 14 arrests were made on the Capitol grounds yesterday means they might come back. We already know we have very little visibility into their means of planning. We know that the inauguration is around the corner, and it would stand to reason that there will be another large gathering on that day as well. We've got to make some changes and make some changes very quickly. And I'm been in discussions all day today with House colleagues, with my Senate colleagues, and with the Capitol Police and the Department of Defense to make sure that we take steps to implement those changes. So with that, let me, I know there's a whole bunch of other topics we haven't covered here, but I'm glad to take questions.
Senator Murphy, my name is Nancy Lynch, managing editor at News 8. I see that you had 2 conversations with Capitol Police Chief today. Was there any discussion as to why police officers at the Capitol actually removed barriers and let the rioters in? Was that in an attempt to de-escalate the situation? Did he have any comments on that?
Yeah, just so we can organize questions here, just raise your hand and have Ed call on you so we don't have everybody sort of piping in. So there are a number of really concerning videos online, and we have asked the chief of police to look at those videos and respond to us with explanations. I think it's very hard to look at a 30-second video or a 40-second video without context to understand what was happening at the time and what led to those actions. From what we have been told, there was an active confrontation for over an hour outside the Capitol complex between the Capitol Police, municipal police, and the protesters before they breached the building. And I think what you're seeing today is a lot of videos that raise concerns, and we're asking for information today from Capitol Police. We've also seen a lot of videos in which there are law enforcement officers heroically battling to defend the Capitol. We've got to put all of those together and get a full accounting of what happened. I think there's some really complicated questions here. One of the things that we've been talking about in the last 12 hours is the rules of engagement. Listen, I'm glad that there was only one individual shot yesterday, but if we can't defend the Capitol simply because we don't have enough individuals present to respond to thousands of protesters, then we either need to change the rules of engagement or we need to dramatically increase the physical protection and personnel presence around the Capitol.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Senator Blumenthal had suggested in availability about an hour ago that businesses around the Capitol seem to have had more protection and more security in place than the Capitol itself. He also seemed to suggest that may have not been unplanned, meaning that supervisors may have made a certain call. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't have any information on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Senator.
Ed, I'm gonna ask Ed to call out people. Okay, thanks.
We're going to go to Catherine Tillich-McManus from CQ Roll Call.
Hi, Senator. The Capitol Police have historically been very resistant to transparency, public transparency. They might be more open with lawmakers. Can you address a standard of public disclosure that you would like to see whatever an investigation looks like, whether a report be made public, or will there be public hearings? Do you anticipate that either in the legislative branch committee or Senate rules, House administration?
I don't have any details yet, and discussions are underway right now with both the House and Senate leadership about what the structure of an inquiry will look like. I can speak for myself. I think as much of this inquiry should be public as possible. This is the people's house. These are taxpayer dollars that are being used to pay these officers and to fund the United States military. Taxpayers deserve to know why we were unable to defend the Capitol from attack, why it took only an hour for a handful of ragamuffin, half-armed protesters to enter the building and pose a grave threat to the continuity of democracy. So I would like to see, as obviously there's going to be some information that has to remain classified, but my hope would be that we have as much of this conversation in public as possible. And again, to me, this is not just a question about the Capitol Police. I don't, listen, there was 8,000 to 10,000 protesters that were engaged yesterday with law enforcement. Even if we doubled the size of the Capitol Police, I don't know that they will ever be a significant enough enforcement agency to be able to stop 10,000 people from rushing the Capitol, which is why we have to ask why it took so long for the Department of Defense to get there. Again, if you can't deploy thousands of soldiers to the U.S. Capitol when the vice president is there, the Speaker of the House, and the president of the Senate within an hour, then why are we spending $700 billion on the military? If you can't figure out a way to get significant troops to the Capitol within 60 minutes of an attempted assault on the Capitol, then I'm not exactly sure what the purpose of the investment we make every year in the Department of Defense is. And some of this, I think, has to do with the protocols that allow that provide a bunch of checks before the Department of Defense arrives to quell a civilian protest. And there are some good reasons for those checks, but clearly that process took far too long yesterday.
And are you in agreement with Senator Schumer that Sergeant at Arms Stenger should no longer be employed by the legislative branch?
I am.
All right, next we're going to go with Morgan Wright with Next Star.
Hey, Senator, just wondering where you stand with supporting these efforts to invoke the 25th Amendment, or do you support, going down the route of impeachment once again? Where do you stand with both of those?
Listen, I am absolutely supportive of an effort to invoke the 25th Amendment, and I would be supportive of efforts to remove the president via impeachment. I think that this president is unhinged, he is unstable, he is angry, and we can't assume that he isn't going to try to find new ways to rally his supporters in another insurrection against the government, whether it be in Washington or in our state capitals. I think this is an incredibly perilous moment for democracy. I think it is really irresponsible for people to think of yesterday as some one-off dust-up. This is a president who has convinced his supporters that the election was stolen, and the only means by which a right can be wronged is for them to rise up and fight. Listen, I will share with you, I'm skeptical that there's either a path through impeachment or the 25th Amendment to remove the president. I have watched the president's enablers long enough to know that they are unlikely to rise up and remove him from power through the 25th Amendment. I have also watched my Republican colleagues in the Senate long enough and closely enough to know that they are not likely to support impeachment in the next 2 weeks. But I, of course, have long thought he was unfit for office. I supported to remove him because I believed that he would not stop using the powers of the Oval Office to try to corrupt our democracy after the Ukraine scandal, and we have all been proven right.
And next, we're going to Ali Oshinsky from Connecticut Public Radio.
Senator, so I'm wondering if you could help us understand the difference in preparation by the Capitol Police for events like yesterday as compared to protests this summer by Black Lives Matter protesters. What goes into the calculus they make of preparing the Capitol Police as well as National Guard for that day? And why wasn't that calculus made yesterday?
It's hard for me to understand why the Capitol Police did not request pre-positioned assets from the National Guard. I mean, all you had to do was be able to use Reddit to understand that there were at least some people that were talking about doing something incredibly dangerous and desperate. Our staff was told to stay away from the Capitol yesterday because of a threat of violence. I don't think that order has ever been given to our staff in the past. And so there clearly was knowledge that the threat level was higher yesterday. My understanding is that Mayor Bowser had requested assistance ahead of time from the National Guard, and that a small number of National Guard troops had been sent to do traffic control, but were not close enough to the Capitol to be able to assist in efforts to defend it. And again, my understanding is that it wasn't until 2 hours after the hostilities had begun that an official request was made to bring National Guard troops to the Capitol complex. One of the things that I raised today with the Secretary of the Army is, whether we should be relying only on National Guard troops. Remember, unless they are pre-positioned, these are people with other jobs. It takes them hours to leave their current place of employment, get into uniform, and arrive at the Capitol. That cannot be our plan for defending the United States Capitol against attack. There has got to be a mechanism by which we get the United States military to defend the Capitol within 30 to 60 minutes of an attack. Again, I think that the Capitol Police should have requested more help ahead of time, but there may be circumstances in the future where no reasonable person would have known that there was a threat. And in that case, it can't take hours to get National Guard troops to the Capitol. We have to be able to get help faster.
And just a quick follow-up, if I can. What role do you think race played in the Capitol Police's response to the mob and preparation to yesterday?
Well, if those were Black Lives Matters protesters breaching the Capitol, there wouldn't have been 14 arrests yesterday. There's no doubt in my mind that these protesters would have been treated differently. And we have plenty of evidence to show that protesters have been treated incredibly differently in the past. Those folks walking into the Capitol yesterday, they felt like they were acting without repercussions. Some of them were taking selfies with police officers. And while I think we have to sort of dive deep into the TikTok of what happened to understand why there perhaps weren't more confrontations inside that building, I think it stands to reason that, if this was a BLM protest, you wouldn't have had only a dozen people arrested on the Capitol grounds yesterday.
Next, we have Marianne Levine from Politico.
Hi, Senator Murphy. Thanks for doing this call with us. I wanted to know, do you think that how do you think yesterday's events affect the Democratic agenda, if at all, either in the next 2 weeks or when you guys take the Senate majority on January 20th? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Listen, I think the question is not so much what are Democrats going to do in response to these events. It's what are Republicans going to do? I think Republicans have to make a decision as to whether they are going to allow this megalomaniac to remain in charge of their party. And their continued acquiescence to him and his demands, even after the breach was made, is disgusting, and it's super dangerous for our democracy. Senator Hawley had a chance last night to withdraw his second objection as a means to pull the country together. He didn't do that, and it's a signal that Republicans are going to continue to try to use the president and his grievance structure in order to incentivize violence. So we're going to be laser-like focused on our agenda of making work pay, beating COVID-19, rebuilding this country, and attacking climate change. And we're going to try to do that in a way that, brings Republicans into the conversation. I don't think that what happened yesterday changes, our agenda. We've been given a mandate to govern and to change this country for the better. I think Republicans are going to have a serious conversation amongst themselves as to how they cast Donald Trump out from the leadership position of their party. And we've begun to have a lot of those conversations across the aisle. I'm not sure how much Senate Republicans listen to us, but one of the things yesterday did facilitate was more conversation between Republicans and Democrats about the danger of President Trump and his movement, and there is potentially an awakening that will happen amongst at least a significant portion of the Republican establishment about the danger of allowing Donald Trump to continue to have as much power as he does.
Thank you very much.
All right, next we go with Mark Paziokis from the Connecticut Mirror.
Senator, you already expressed your skepticism about the 25th Amendment actually being invoked, but I'd like to follow up a little bit on that. Would you encourage cabinet officials, to remain in office in the off chance that there is a potential to use the 25th Amendment? The Transportation Secretary is leaving, although not until January 11th, apparently. So would you address that, please?
I'm not really sure what the utility of these 11th hour resignations are. I mean, these are by and large officials who stood by Trump through abusive behavior after abusive behavior, after violation of the Constitution, after violation of the Constitution. I'm not sure that resigning now is, righting any moral wrong in the universe. I think some of this is Republicans, trying to save their reputations by, leaving at the last minute. Nobody should pat any of these folks on the back for sticking around this long, empowering this president's reckless behavior up to and through his remarks at the White House yesterday. I mean, the time, if this was all concerning to you, maybe you should have resigned when the president said he was going to go down to the White House lawn and encourage people to march on and potentially attack the Capitol. And I do think there is reason to worry about who the president will put into these positions, especially, national security and justice positions, should you see massive resignations. We still are going to need to rely on the chain of command to refuse any orders from the president to use law enforcement or the military to obstruct the transfer of power. And, I don't have a great read onto the folks that are there. They've been there for about 3 milliseconds at DOJ and DOD, but I do worry about who the president would select if we lose some of these folks.
The president issued a statement, or at least somebody on his behalf issued a statement that he has accepted that Joe Biden is the president-elect. One, do you have confidence that that actually reflects the president's position? And have you received any information either through back channels or other means that would help you decide, whether that's the case?
I don't believe anything that Donald Trump says, up to and including this last statement. I guess I'm glad that he made the statement, but I have no expectation that he will stick to it. There's other reporting coming out of the White House talking about the fact that he is unraveling today, and that doesn't sound like someone who is going to give up and engage in the peaceful transfer of power all of a sudden. And I have not heard any back channel, communication from the White House or anybody close to it.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Matt Karen from Fox 61.
Hi, Senator. I apologize if this was already asked. I was trying to figure out how to raise my hand during the first question. Given the chaos that we saw at the United States Capitol the other day, I'm wondering if I can get your thoughts on if you think that we should have a public traditional inauguration like we usually do, or do we need to give more consideration to something that might be more secure?
We can't let these terrorists win. American democracy rests on not just the peaceful transition of power, but the public transition of power. We believe it's important for the country and the world to see one administration passing power to another, and that's what we're going to do. I have not had consultations with the Biden administration, but my belief is that we should hold the inauguration. We should make sure we have every bit of security necessary to make sure that it isn't disrupted. But we aren't going to let these terrorists shut down democracy, just like we did last night. I mean, we could have packed it in last night and gone home and come back today. We thought it was important to get back into that chamber as quickly as possible, even though the glass hadn't been cleaned up from the floor, in order to show that these thugs can't stop American democracy. And I would counsel the same when it comes to the scheduling of the inauguration. It was obviously going to be a smaller inauguration to begin with because of COVID. So, we weren't talking about, hundreds of thousands of people descending on the Capitol, which probably makes, crowd control, at least at the inaugural site, easier.
And just a quick follow-up, if I could. There's going to be a lot of time to answer and ask questions and place blame. There's still a lot of partisan talk on both sides of the aisle this morning. But for the average single mom who's trying to reconcile the images that her child may have seen on television the other night and instill at the same time a sense of pride of country, what does she say to her child, and how does this nation unite and heal?
Well, I mean, listen, obviously I have to confront, that question as well as a parent. My third grader spent this morning, talking virtually with his class about what happened last night. The teacher felt the need to spend the first, hour addressing kids' concerns. And obviously my children spent yesterday, wondering where their father was through all of this. They knew I was safe. But I think we, have an obligation to keep democracy going and moving and do it in a very publicly visible way so that we can show everyone in this country, adults and kids together, that you can't beat us with these thuggish acts. And so in a way, all of this happening right on the precipice of the most important moment of American democracy, the inauguration of a new president, gives us the opportunity to show that we're not going away. American democracy is still here. Now, I'll say this. I think this commands us in the new Congress to really think about reforms to our democracy, to make our democracy better, to give people a feeling that their input matters more. A lot of these folks that marched on the Capitol yesterday, have effectively given up on democracy. There's a lot of people all across the country who have given up on democracy, who just, look at their lives and think to themselves, American democracy isn't producing for me. It's not making my life any better. It's not increasing my wages. It's not allowing my kids to lead a better life than I did. So, I do think we have to understand that democracy is in crisis today, not just because of Donald Trump and these marauders, but also because democracy hasn't been delivering for people for a while. And we've got to be able to face that crisis down. And that's one that we can face down, Republicans and Democrats together.
Thank you.
Okay, next we'll have Julia Bergman from the New London Day.
Hi, Senator. Two questions. Do you have a timeline yet for the investigation by Congress? And given that you're in line to be the chairman of the committee that oversees the Capitol Police, does a situation like Wednesday give you pause about whether, in the future, if they were to request any further funding or resources?
We don't have a timeline yet. Congresswoman DeLauro and Representative Ryan have announced an inquiry through the House Appropriations Committee. I've been on the phone with both Rosa and Tim today, and we'll talk about how to link that inquiry with one that may happen in the Senate. So no timing on all of that, and obviously the leaders will have something to say about this. And yes, of course, we're going to look at the way in which we spend money on the Capitol Police. We spend a lot of money on the Capitol Police. We have provided them with very significant funding increases in the last few years. And, whether solely, well, for one reason or another, the Capitol Police could not protect us from attack at an incredibly dangerous moment where Mike Pence, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Grassley, 1, 2, and 3 in the line of succession, were inside the building. So yeah, we have to ask these questions about, are we spending money in the right way on the Capitol Police, and what are we getting in return? But again, I asked the same question about the Department of Defense. I don't chair that subcommittee, but I'm on the Appropriations Committee. I hope to be a member of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee in the next Congress. And I'm going to be asking the same question of the Department of Defense. Why the hell are we spending $700 billion on DOD if they can't defend the Capitol? It shouldn't just be up to the Capitol Police, especially when there are 10,000 people marching on us.
And just one follow-up. In your conversation with the Secretary of the Army, did he give any explanation for why it took so long for the military to respond?
Yes. There is a protocol today that requires the mayor of the city, in order to request, and then a level of coordination with the Capitol Police. That, first of all, I think we have to ask ourselves, should the mayor be involved at all in requesting the armed forces to defend perhaps the most important federal building in the country? Second, we have to ask about why that process of getting an official request from the Capitol Police to the military took so long. Third, the decision was made early on to respond with National Guard forces. Again, these are folks who have other jobs, who aren't ready to be deployed. And so one of the things we've asked the Secretary of Army to look into is whether there are other forces in and around the Capitol who could get there quicker than the National Guard. But that decision to rely solely on the National Guard is part of what ended up taking until about 5:30 or so before the first Guard troops arrived at the building.
All right, next we're gonna have Trish Turner from ABC.
Hi, Senator. Thanks so much. Just a bit more on the National Guard front, please. Can you just sort of give us a bit of a tick-tock? We understand, or do you understand, that Vice President Pence got involved at any point, Speaker Pelosi? And do you know anything about potentially the president slow walking the request for the Guard?
I've seen the reports about the interaction between Vice President Pence and the National Guard. There is nothing in existing protocols or statute that requires the vice president to request National Guard troops to the Capitol. My understanding is that currently the request needs to be made by the mayor and coordinated through the Capitol Police. So I have seen the reports of communications the vice president had, but my understanding is that those came much later in the day, that the process was already underway to bring the National Guard to the Capitol before any conversations happened with the vice president. And I do not know, obviously we were tracking that day stories about the Department of Defense, reports that the Department of Defense had refused to approve the deployment of National Guard. But I have not learned that there was any refusal of requests made. It seems to be that the requests took a long time to process.
And what, can you just say really quickly, what was the Pence involvement then? What do you know that to be?
I don't know. I've seen the reports of it. I haven't, I haven't had any independent confirmation of it. I mean, I think there were a number of calls later in the day with the cross section of national leadership. So, there were, as I understand it, multiple calls in which the speaker, the majority leader, Senator Schumer, and even Vice President Pence were talking about the situation at the Capitol with the Department of the Army and the Capitol Police. And so it may be that his interaction was through, one or multiple of those phone calls.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we're gonna go with Mike Savino from WFSB, Connecticut.
Senator, Speaker Pelosi is calling for the Capitol Police to resign. Do you think you've seen enough?
Hey, Mike, I can't hear. I don't know if it's just me, but I can't.
Or do you want to wait for more of these details that you're going to? Sorry.
Yeah, Mike, we lost you. I'm sorry. I don't. You were talking about somebody resigning, but I didn't hear the individual. Ed, did you pick up on it?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. No, I was asking, Speaker Pelosi has called for the resignation of the chief of the Capitol Police. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on, did you see enough yesterday to call for Chief Son to resign, or do you want to wait for this investigation to play out?
Yeah, I have not, called on the chief to resign. I have been in pretty regular contact with him. Listen, I think there's going to have to be some pretty significant changes at the Sergeant of Arms office and at the Capitol Police. But I haven't, made an independent decision about the fitness of the chief to continue.